Hello! Welcome to Why Not Both, the podcast all about how our multiple passions and interests shape our identity and our lives. My name is Pam Schaefer, and I am a musician and therapist in Los Angeles, and I also happen to be your host. This podcast is produced by Laura Studeris, and for this season, we've partnered up with Under the Radar magazine. If you like what you hear, you can hang out with us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram at WNB the podcast. And if you really, really like what you hear, please support us on Patreon. We are under Why Not Both podcast. When you join our Patreon, you get a whole bunch of really cool behind the scenes stuff, and you get to chat with us. And that's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you enjoy our interviews. For this week's episode, we got to hang out with Lauren from CHVRCHES and her amazing coterie of cats. I hope that you enjoy our interview.
Exactly. It only took me 5 minutes to realize, oh yeah, Pam, hit the record button.
That's fine. All the discussion about cats and sneezing can be off-grid. That's fine.
Exactly. People will just have to wonder, what were they saying about cats and sneezing? They'll never know.
We'll never know.
Welcome to Why Not Both, where we are like medium chaotic.
Well, I think that fits because I was late for the Zoom. I couldn't get the Zoom to work. And it's like, how many times have we done this? And it's still slightly chaotic. So I feel like I fit right in.
Yay! That makes me so happy. Whenever people are like, oh, like everything's like back to normal, I'm like, no, we broke normal and we now are medium chaotic.
Yes, I think that for a while we were all trying to pretend. Yeah. And now there's no point in pretending anymore. We're like, it's just some things are not achievable.
Good news, we get to embrace our inner furry chaos demons.
Yes, I mean, I don't know if I'm happy about embracing it. I should just like let go and let God or whatever else dictate. I don't know.
I follow the rules of cats. Like, I'm just like, all right, you seem to have this down. Sometimes you want to come in my house. Sometimes you want to leave. Sometimes you want to snuggle on the top of my couch. Sometimes you stare at me disdainfully from the kitchen table. I'm like, okay, all right, you're just yourself. I will learn this.
And you have to react moment by moment. Sometimes they're standing in exactly the same place, looking at you in the same way, and you think that they want a little pat on the head, and they do not. And I'm like, oh, sorry. I think several times a day, I'm like, oh, sorry, I did too much. It's something that I say to them. I'm like, oh, that's a good life lesson, to be reactive to people's moods, be empathetic to what's going on. And you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I did too much. I apologize.
Oh. I affectioned too much. I joke that like my affection levels are very much like a cat, where I'm like, pay attention to me, but like from over there.
Yes. Let me come and go as I please. Support my dreams, but also my independence. There's lots of demands.
I feel as though that is kind of like being a musician in general. I just realized.
But I suppose it's quite feline. They wouldn't enjoy the noise or the travel of the. Oh. But then I guess sometimes. No, noise-wise, sometimes neither do I. I feel like most of my life on tour is trying to find a quiet corner that's not inhabited by... That's going to sound bad, I was going to say inhabited by men. But to a degree, yes, because, all the rest of churches are men. So on tour, especially when we're doing the hardcore bubble stuff that we're doing, we don't go anywhere. So sometimes I'm like, my kingdom for a corner of the earth that is not inhabited by... an action movie or like a video game conference. What's I clearly don't know anything about this. Competition that they're having amongst each other, which is very nice. But sometimes I feel like, our tour manager made that joke. She was like, "You're just like a little cat running around this venue trying to find a quiet corner." I'm like, "Oh, they're coming! Oh, the noise is coming!" Like just running away. But then maybe that's a silly choice of employment for me because the nature of being in a band is that there will be a lot of noise in a lot of places all the time. So
that is, and I hadn't even thought of that in the bubble, that it's like, oh no, I just thought of being bubbled with people that were playing video games the whole time. I would lose it. I would lose my mind.
Luckily they play like, what was it? This last tour, they were doing a lot of Tetris on Switch, so they can have leagues, or clearly I know loads about this, of Tetris. But then that's nice. I think it's very wholesome. It's not like they're playing kind of crazy war games or anything like that. So,
True.
And it's more calm than when they play FIFA. FIFA is not calm. But if we do get to do the touring we've committed to this year, maybe they will have to get around to FIFA again. But I don't know. I feel like a strange observer in these situations because I just never really got into the gaming, and I feel like a bit of a fraud. So,
when you said Tetris, I was like, that is the one game that I do really like. But I realized I play solo. I was like, there's leagues for Tetris.
I didn't know that either. I think you can set up like group games, and if you're on the same network, and you can play against each other. And I've learned so much in these last 10 years.
I was gonna say, I was just like a portal into the world.
Yes, if you want to read in the venue, do it before 11 a.m. Anything after that is impossible.
Oh my gosh, I would be a co-cat where we'd probably find like separate corners. I just realized it was like,
and if we find each other in the same corner, we have to just hiss quietly and then like sit in silence.
That I hadn't even thought of that because like the energy of being on tour, normally you can kind of, cat or squirrel away, but when you're bubbled, you can't really do that. That's really quite
you can't cat. Yes, I guess obviously incredibly grateful to be able to play shows full stop, and if the way to keep the shows going is to basically self-isolate in each place to a degree, and if we do anything, then we do it outdoors. And but yeah, it didn't really occur to me how much of the mental health aspect of touring involved just those little 10-minute wanders where you wander to a coffee shop, or you can go into a bookshop, or you go to the movies on a day off or whatever, to emulate normal life. And you can't really do that much of that in the current setup. So I was like, you just have to, I guess with everything that anybody's had to do in the last 2 years, as you said at the start, it's not normal. So we can't pretend that it's normal, but you just have to figure out how best to approximate it to trick yourself, if that makes sense. So I did a lot of walking around outside. And certain points of the tour that got a little bit more difficult. Like I have a friend that lives in Minneapolis, and I was like, we will meet for an outdoor coffee. And she was like, will we? Because it's November. It's November in Minneapolis, and we sat outside in a car park with takeaway coffee. It was an experience. We definitely, in that moment, I was really touched by how much suffering she would do in order to hang out. I was like, I can't hang out with you inside, and I can't see you at the show. So if we're going to do it, we're going to do it in this car park. But that's a very 21, 22 friendship romance, I would say, that we can all relate to in some way. Socializing
has become like, I described it to another friend as like a very high stakes activity. Like, there's no just casual, how it used to be, like you said, you'd go for a walk, you'd go to a coffee shop, and in LA at least, you always run into somebody. Like,
yes,
there's the running into people phenomenon that we don't have anymore, really. And so it becomes this, like, if you're going to do something, it has to be with such intent that it has this like thing about it where you're like, we are having a coffee.
And somebody has researched where it is. And if there is availability outdoors, and we know who else is coming and what their requirements are. And there's not really, you can't really be spontaneous. I feel like, I suppose in 2020, there was an element of spontaneity when everyone was like, I'm running out of toilet paper, but I've got flour. I'll trade you. Like, I remember my friend being like, oh, well, we accidentally ordered loads of toilet roll in January. So we've got loads. I can bring you some. And I was like, do you need tinned goods? Because I stockpile, apparently, not during that time period, just to be clear, but I don't understand American measurements of things. So sometimes I order, if I do like a online shopping order, I'll go pick it up and be like, oh, I didn't realize what that measurement was. I do not need 40 individual tomatoes or whatever it is, So yes, but it was helpful, nice to be able to do something useful in those moments. But that's probably the last time I was spontaneous. Was by accident ordering too many chickpeas or something off the internet.
I wish I had that excuse of not knowing American measurements, but it's quite literally absent-mindedness that sometimes things will arrive and I'm like, who did this? It was me.
You from the past, giving you a gift or giving you something you don't want and now feel shame about.
Exactly. Maybe giving me an abundance that I did not expect. No, that I loved what you said about how that was like our spontaneity, though, was that like trading. I remember doing that too. Like we would have on my friend's lawn, we would trade different things. Like they had a huge orange tree at the time. During
good person to know, vitamin C.
Exactly. We were like, we are not getting scurvy during this. We are boosting our immunity. And like people would come to the front lawn and then like trade other stuff like from their yards, or like we could have like picnics where it's like we were inside and they were outside, because like essentially at the beginning of all of this I was helping my friends clean their house and we all were creatively co-working together and all this stuff, and we we're like, well, I guess if one of us has it, all of us have it. We should just have a team. Even though I technically live alone in my place, I was at their place a whole bunch, so we had like pod headquarters east and pod headquarters west.
Oh, yeah. Well, that sounds very, very pleasant. I would like to say I had that in here, but I don't. I do live with one other person, but 2 cats. So, and my partner would be going to his studio all the time to do works, and I was working in the house on the CHVRCHES record. So I feel like by the time he would come home at night, I'd be like, where did you go? What did you do? Who did you see? Tell me everything. I've been talking to... Like I have 2 tiny furry colleagues, but they can't really give me feedback but it's nice. Every so often I have to be working and then a cat will just appear.
Yes.
It's like, bless this room, and then leaves. Right. It was nicer than being completely solitary, I think. So I was lucky to have.
I'm glad that you had honestly, I'm glad you had partner and cats, because the second part of the pandemic, I was more isolated, like during that really bad wave at the end of like 2020 and then going into 2021. Like we weren't potted. Like one of my friends had to move back to London, like different stuff. But I was just like, well, I like alone time. I enjoy being alone. And even as a, alone time introvert, same thing. I was like working on songs. My sometimes cat was here. But after a while, I was like, I think I'm having full on conversations with the cat.
Yes. Well, yeah, even like if you think that you're set up, like not that I'm saying any, like obviously I'm incredibly lucky to be able to work from home, was in a different position than a lot of people. So I'm not trying to sound like a total bastard who doesn't understand how lucky they are. But yeah, there were points during the first few months where I was like, well, I spend a lot of time alone on tour, and I spend a lot of time inside on tour and in windowless rooms on tour. So in a way, I'm kind of like primed to entertain myself, and like, it'll be okay. If we get to go outside once a day, that's great. But after, even then I was like, man, if you've been in a job that sort of prepared you for that level of isolation and you were finding it that difficult, I'm like, man, I can't imagine how intense it is for other people and for their mental health, and let alone all the other stuff that everyone's worrying about with everything. So
that's the thing, is like everybody, it's fascinating because everyone always says to me, they're just like, oh, I shouldn't complain, I'm so grateful. And it's like, both of those can be true. Like you can be incredibly grateful for your circumstance, but everybody has also had their own circumstance of like, what is happening? This is terrible. And
now it's a counseling session. Which I'm okay. I'm okay. I think. Am I? I don't know. I think if you listen to CHVRCHES songs, you're like, is she okay? Hard to say. Hard to say.
I was like, full disclosure, hilariously, as you can see, I mean, there's a piano behind me. Clearly, I play music. But my day job is I'm a therapist. So occasionally, like, the therapist will come out and I'm like, oh no, did I just say a therapist thing? And then I was like, I did say a therapist thing.
But you're deploying that good into the world. That's true. That's a good thing.
True. Because, like, even my clients have said the same thing, where everybody, what I described it as like same vibe, but different details, where it's everyone's like, this is bad. Also, I have good stuff. But it's like everybody's bad and good stuff is like a variation on a theme. It's like, everybody has one thing in the pandemic that they're like, oh, this totally carried me through. I'm so grateful. And I've definitely had one absurd circumstance that they're like, well, that was terrible.
Yeah.
No, and it's interesting thinking about like what you just said about the lyrics of like, is she okay?
We don't know. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I do know. Definitively yes or no. And sometimes I don't, in song form or otherwise. But I think that's fair enough. I think that's just being a person, I hope, as far as I can tell.
Well, it's a good place to put all that stuff too. Like that's when I think about even like that you were making a record during this time, I was curious what that experience was like. And also if it was different than other times that you've been like, hey, I'm going to channel this stuff into songs. And I'm just like, oh, what was the experience like of channeling things into songs during the, gestures to everything?
During all this. I think it's interesting to look back on it with now there's the record's out and we've had time to kind of reflect on it. I don't even know if consciously at the time I thought about putting things into something. I just was grateful to have something to do during the day and something that I could work on and obsess over that wasn't the news and not being able to get to your family in an emergency situation and all the catastrophizing that will involve. So it was helpful to have something else to be obsessively doing, which is maybe unhealthy in some ways. But I do think when we're, especially for this record, because it was a lot more specific thematically than some of the previous stuff, there was potentially a lot of things you could research and really dig into and immerse yourself in. And I think that being able to put my brain in that space was very helpful. And I think in hindsight, when I look at it, we definitely weren't writing about the pandemic necessarily, but I do think that post 2020, I look at that as like it was a drawing of a line and under things, sort of where the band, especially creatively, where the band had been and where it was going. And I look at that and I'm like, well, the fourth record for me feels very different. Maybe not to, so it's not like a totally new sonic landscape, but in terms of the writing and what I wanted to do in it, it really felt to me at the time and looking back on it, like I'd reached my, like, what's the point in doing this if you're not really doing it? Point, if that makes sense. And I don't know, I feel like it is like, even when we've been working on, if we've been working on new songs or I've been working on other things, it really feels like it flipped a switch in my brain somehow where I'm like, I don't know. That's not to say that anything I would do after this will be any quote unquote good in the objective manner, but I feel like it just really changed the way my brain was looking at it. Because when you're on that juggernaut and it's like, put out a record every 2 years, here we go. And there's a lot of voices around the project and what you're doing and blah. And I don't know, I think it was really helpful to just be completely isolated by yourself and left to your own devices and then come up with something that is different lyrically and it is different conceptually and be proud of that. And I don't know, now I sound like I'm just reading pages out of The Artist's Way, but like I don't know, I think it really, when I look at that body of work, I'm like, okay, not that I dislike anything that came before that, I just think it feels more fully realized. And I'm like, okay, well that's the standard then, that's the barometer of what to do. And I don't know, it was kind of helpful to think that something good came out of that time period. It was a kind of strange one-woman writers workshop, writers retreat that I didn't intend to go on, but I think it was very helpful in a way because I don't know, previously I would have been like, oh well, synth pop lyrics shouldn't be this, synth pop lyrics shouldn't be about that. And there was a lot of time inside to reflect on things that had been happening around everyone at that time, but also around the band for the last 10 years of it. And I was 23 when I met Ian, 24 when we started the band, and I'm 34 now. So like that's a very specific time period in your life. And I kind of felt like I don't want to keep talking about the same things over and over and over again. And I don't think you should be talking about the same things at 33, 34 as you were in early 20s. Yeah. But it kind of feel like, to me, I look at that record as I'm like, okay, this is still the definitive time to talk about all the things we've hinted at on certain CHVRCHES records. And it's like, now we do it in this way, through this lens. And not that it's a drawing of a line, but kind of. It feels like a drawing of a line under that time period, because there was the before of everything for everybody, and then there's now. And like, I kind of feel like there's a lot I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this, but I've been doing it already, so sorry. But there's a lot of stuff that I look at, and I'm like, you were really spending fucks on a lot of stuff that did not need to be having fucks spent on them. Yeah. And the post 2020 fucks, I think, should be different in any part of your life, and especially creatively. So I'm like, no, yes, I'm just trying to
with you on that.
Yes, I'm trying to be my one-woman writing workshop buddy because there's nobody else in here. I'm like, yes, and we don't go back, and we strive for creative newness or whatever. And then I ask the cat, I show the cat the lyrics. I'm like, what do you think? And then it eats the corner. I'm like, it's a no. It's a no from her.
You're like, it's a no from her. She just wants to snack on it.
Yes. Or a hard yes, because I suppose cats don't know anything that's happening in my work at all. But I feel like if they were gonna like a Church's record,
they'd want to eat it.
They would want to, yeah, I think so. Anything they see in the building that they enjoy, they automatically test with their mouth. So I'm like, all right. And cats are they've got darkness in them, so maybe they're secret little assassin murderers that I tuck into a plushy bed at night or whatever. So maybe Screen Violence is the album for them. I don't know.
It sounds like what you gave this record is like all new kind of. What jumped in my mind was like attention and then intention, and I was like, ooh. I was like,
that's the therapist there. The intention. Right? I didn't even think to describe it in that way, but yeah, I feel like once we had the title when we started, and it's the first time we'd ever written a record with an album title in mind. And I think at the start of it, I thought that the record was going to be more fully concept and written about external things. And then after a few weeks, it kind of became clearer that this is just going to be a landscape to project the stories on. And then once then I do feel like that's set an intention. And I think I can be really, really terrible at being overly critical of everything that I say and do. So, but I do think that with the setting the intention of when it comes to work and things like that and creative work, I do think you have to be a good self-editor. And I don't know, I think this time at least it felt like there was I knew what path we wanted to be on and what path I should be on. So then the editing was about making sure that everything was as tight as possible, that the imagery was as consistent as possible. And that's definitely different to self-editing I've done before, where I've been like, I don't know, is it simple enough? Will people like it enough? Is that not very pop enough? Like, very pop enough. That's not very good. Is that not pop enough? And like, especially when those things have been said, then you internalize them and you're like, oh, is it supposed to be that? Is it supposed to be that? I don't know. And I think getting rid of the is it supposed to be question is important. I feel like so much of the good things that came out of that record, I was like, well, you're in charge of it is supposed to be, and then you do the work to strive to get it to that place. So
that it's what you intend it to be, because that's so hard when people are talking about your creative work. Because that definitely, I'm so glad that you said like, I was in my like one woman writing intensive.
Yeah. I didn't sign up, but I ended up there. So, yeah.
Maybe you were the one in a Miyazaki film where it's like, here you go.
Yes.
Your place now. But when you're writing, like, I don't know about you, but like if I'm thinking about how people are going to perceive it when I'm initially spitting out an idea, it just crushes that idea.
Yep.
All of a sudden, I'm just like, it's all the external stuff, and it just goes,
like, yeah, and I feel like so much of it depends on how your mental headspace is doing at that time. And if you, like the other day, I was sitting in front of the piano and I was like, trying to write something, diddling about. And then I just went from 0 to 100 of like sitting, trying to do something for about 15 minutes. And then just head in my hands, like teary eyed, being like, I'll never write anything ever again. This is all so terrible. This is exactly what everybody probably in their deepest, darkest thoughts thinks, is that you don't do anything. And then I was like, hold on, what in the name is happening? How did we get here? And I was like, oh, you haven't exercised for 2 weeks. You have been drinking a bunch of booze every night when you're watching TV. And I was like, if I was taking better care of myself, I would be like, this is the process. And some days you get something good and some days you don't. And I'm sure nobody thinks that really. And if they do think that, why does that matter? You can unpack it all. But in the moment, I was like, oh, it's over. Like, I think... the drama of it. I feel bad. My partner says that He's just stopped saying it to me because every time I can't quite get something as immediately as I want to get it, I forget every experience that's gone before that.
Of course.
And I don't think I'm a dramatic person generally, necessarily, but when it comes to this, I am the most like movie, like, and I'm being like, oh, it's over. I'll never write anything again. It's not just this song. It's everything. It's not just this moment. And I'm going to disappoint everybody. I can't. And then when he tries to point out, but you said that last time. I'm like, this is not helpful.
You're like,
this is
last time. This isn't last time. This is this time.
Yes. So no amount of like pragmatic common sense can help at that time. So now I think he kind of just leaves me to it and is like, I'm sure it'll be fine. And I'm like, he doesn't know anything. Exactly. And then about 2 hours later, I'm like, oh, I think I have it.
Oh, yeah.
Poor guy. He thought, oh, I'll hang out with that girl in that indie band. That seems like a good idea. He did not know that
they never know.
He was signing up for a little bag of baggage that's just going to be crying in different places around his house and then laughing maniacally about something. He doesn't know. So
this is so deeply relatable.
We feel feelings. It's not. I don't know. I've tried not to, but turns out we're stuck with this, so we just have to muddle through.
It's a gift, all the feelings. Like what did my partner say? Because he's an engineer and producer and like does, he occasionally will like, he's really good at that last 2% of a song where you're like stuck at the 98% and you're just like, I know it's almost done, but it's not quite done, but it's almost there, but I don't know what it needs. Do I need to subtract something? Do I need to add? How do I ever finish? And like literally he's really good at that little just like blink. But like whenever I am just angsty about something, he's like, do you need more you in the monitor? Like, do you need more you in the monitor?
I'm like, no, there's far too much of me in all my monitors right now.
Exactly. And like, that's how I know that I'm being like dramatic about something. He's like, do you want everyone else to turn down? Do you need more you?
I mean, but very observant. We're lucky to have people that can observe, support, let it happen.
Yes, because occasionally he'll offer the things that he knows will often appease me, like my velvet weighted blanket, my favorite snacks, or he's just like, oh no, is she hungry?
Oh, that's very kind. I feel like I do a lot of that to myself. Never without a snack in the bag at the studio.
Oh my god.
And I'm like, yes, I'm always like, does baby need to eat? Does baby need to, you have to, I suppose in a way, this sounds really wanky, but I do think, especially when you're trying to coax out creative stuff, you have to treat that like a huffy little baby, or like, what does baby need? I don't know.
Because that feeling.
Does baby need to read something to get? No. Do you want to watch something? Do you need to go outside? What do you need? And you're just waiting. And I clearly do get stressed about it. Otherwise, the crying at the piano story wouldn't have happened. But I was reading the Nick Cave newsletter, the Red Hand Files, and in that, somebody asked him about writer's block, and he said that he used to be fixated on the idea that the words weren't coming, but now he rather likes to look at it as that the words haven't arrived yet. And I feel like 50-50 every time I read a book on like creative practices. I'm like half in, half like, come on now. But I think there's too much, well, not for everybody, but I think there's a lot of discussion of religion and spirituality in certain spaces around that, which I find a little difficult. But I'm definitely open to the idea of like, you have to set yourself up to be in a certain space. And, if you're putting energy into something, then that you can't just expect the muse to hit you on the head as you're walking around. You have to, again, as you say, have intention to be seeking it or whatever. But I think Nick Cave's point was that he was like, well, it's all the work. It's all the process. Like you setting up your creative day and doing a work day of that is setting yourself up to be able to receive the information when it comes. You can't just keep like, oh no, it's not here yet. It's not happened yet. It's not happening. It's not coming. But he's like, they just haven't arrived, and they will arrive when it's time for them to arrive. I'm like, how mindful. But maybe he can say that because he's Nick Cave, and they do always arrive for Nick Cave. And that's the brain is like, well, but for him it's will because he's Nick Cave.
Yes, it's that whole thing where we like grant so much more grace to other people, and then we're like, but not for me. Like I'm the exception there.
No, I am the one that should not be here, and everybody knows that. And I am the one who's only ever going to have this finite number of ideas, and then it's over.
Then it's over.
And everyone's cackling maniacally while they think about it. I'm like, I don't think that's true. I think, if anything, that gives way too much credence to your existence, as if people care that much about it. You know what I mean? Like, maybe you should just get on with it. Play a bit more, write a bit more, and in a couple of days it'll probably be fine. Like,
oh my God, that feeling exactly of just like, I love what you said about setting yourself up to receive, and I love that you spoke to yourself as though you were like just a tiny ordinary baby hedgehog. I'm just like, does baby need snack? Does baby want a book? Does like
you know, is baby actually served by sitting in this room, slapping baby's cell phone head, being like, why haven't you done it yet? I'm like, I'm not saying that, like, if I just sit and watch endless episodes of like Gossip Girl, then lyrics come to like land in my lap, because that's not true. But there has to be like a balance between like trying to seek it out and accepting that it's going to happen, especially with lyrics, I think.
Oh my gosh,
yeah. I feel like musically, like, there's so many more avenues you could go down every moment of the day. Like, not that it means it's easy to write a good song musically, but I think especially when you like, there's a certain thing that you're trying to go for lyrically, I think sometimes it takes time, and you'll be like walking down the street or in the shower or falling asleep, and you're like, no, that's it. I have to wake up and get it at that point.
It's when you least expect it. And also, you mentioned doing like research for it, and that I found fascinating, because I was like, I'm a big nerd. I want to know what you were researching, because I love research. I was like, it's so interesting that then it tied into your narrative. And then the third part that like popped in my head, I was just like, how did that then connect when you were like running it by your bandmates? And so I was like, okay, what were the things? How did you connect? What happened when you brought it to people? I was like,
well, I think everyone, especially in the last few years, everyone's always been really open to lyrics seeking a bit more of a personal bent, I guess, just as time has gone on with the band, and you know, everybody grows as writers, and I don't know, I think it's always, Church's lyrics have always been about finding the balance of like the kind of more abstract and the imagery, which is kind of more what it was like at the beginning of the band, and then it just feels like it's grown into a more focused lens, I suppose, as time has gone on. And with this record, all of us were huge horror fans, but for different reasons, I think. And the guys definitely knew that there would be something in there for them to dig into sonically. But I think for me, I kind of always knew that I wanted to use it as a way to tell a story that felt more female than what was initially the idea. And I think so I was looking at a lot of, I got these books up here, but there's like, I got a lot of like, this here. I could sure do that.
Yes.
Like the teenage slasher movie book. And it goes through, and it goes through the different genres and the different time periods, but there was so many like film posters in it. So as you can see, there's a recurring theme on a lot of these posters.
Nearly naked ladies in peril.
You know? But then I started like doing a bit more like fan-based reading and academic reading about women in horror, and like feminist tropes in horror and feminine tropes in horror, and how to, and I think that's just because that's something I was interested in. I wasn't even conscious that I want to use these things to write about my female experience. But then as the song started to come out, I was like, oh no, this is happening. This is what's happening. And I don't know, like, I never really buy into the idea that a genre can be misogynist or not, because it depends on the storyteller. It depends on that person's perspective. Like, women can make incredibly misogynist films, and a man can make a film that has a very feminist narrative. And I don't know, I never really buy into the idea that horror by definition has to be a woman-hating sexist genre. I just think that's very derivative. And if anything, a lot of the horror fans that I know are women, because I think, and then I started reading about that on the internet. I'm like, why are so many women drawn to this? Like, why are so many female fans struck by something in this? And it just kept kind of recurring in my mind that women know what it is to feel afraid, and women know what it is to feel watched and hunted in their day-to-day life, that a lot of straight men don't.
Right.
So, and when I was reading about the final girl trope, they were talking about why that is. Why are we comfortable watching a woman be terrified in a way? And then originally, when they were talking about that, there was the understanding of film studios and things that the audience wouldn't necessarily be comfortable with a male character being that kind of terrified all the time. And I was like, it's just interesting when you start. And then we kind of got to, then I was like, okay, I know where we're at. Here we go. And in terms of presenting it to the guys in the band, I think they were very like, this is your ball, you can run with it, which is good. Because I think sometimes we've butted heads over certain things in the past because, we are all different people. We have different opinions. We have different perspectives. And it's just, I guess that's the difficulty of collaboration sometimes, is that there's so many amazing parts of it, but ultimately you need to make an end product that represents and speaks for all of you. And sometimes the lyrics I've written probably don't speak for them, and nor should they, because the experience of a 30-something-year-old woman is very different to their experience. Yeah. But I guess it's about whether there can be space made for that. And I think that on this record, especially, we definitely were good at giving each other space to have our individuality and have those, because especially with lyrics, if you're the person singing them, I think it's very difficult to focus group good lyrics, in my opinion. Like, not that those songs don't exist, but especially it depends what you want to say and what you want your art to be. But for me, I'm like, I've never really, this is bad. I'm a bad collaborator in this regard. Like, I don't always open to ideas when people are suggesting things, but whenever I've tried to write something to a more of a brief, it doesn't feel as authentic to me, and I think that people can feel that and sense that in the songs. So yeah, I guess, and it would be different. Like if somebody else in the band was singing the songs on Screen Violence with those lyrics, it wouldn't make sense, right? So, but I guess also as the singer, you're kind of the storyteller to a degree. Right. When you're in the live setting, especially, I'm like, you are the storyteller that's weaving around, and you're like literally sound is coming out of your mouth. So sometimes I've thought about it when I've written down certain things and be like, nah, they're not gonna like this. but I guess, but you're not. I guess that's the tricky balance for the lyricist. It's like you're speaking for yourself and also for the band, and where do you let that balance land? It's tricky to know sometimes.
Yeah, and like everything you said, I was just like, oh my God, this just made my brain fork off in so many different directions. Like, one of the ones that struck me was when you were talking about collaboration in general, that like as the singer and as the lyricist, it is a balance of like describing how you're emotionally relating to something, but then like you said, you're also representing the band. And I thought of how beautiful that is to collaborate, to hold space for everybody in there, where it's like your bandmates are holding space for your story and the story that you want to tell, and you're holding space for the story they want to tell. And it's like, so sonically you're all coming together in this way. I was like, oh, that's really lovely. Like, because you're not always going to agree.
No, and I do think that at this point, like, we all know each other so well and know each other's tastes, and it's easier when you know people that well to have those conversations and figure things out. And as you say, it's about holding space and just respecting what other people are bringing to the table. And that doesn't mean we're always perfect at doing that, but the attempt is half the battle, I think.
Well, and that it's the synergy amongst all of you that then is the end result. And
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that it's like that's what makes things crystallize. And I think about, even when people are talking about solo artists, like, unless someone is like, recording, engineering, producing, mixing, and mastering their entire record themselves, which like is totally possible, you're always like bouncing energy and ideas off of the people that you're working with. Yeah,
it's still collaborative, just in a different way. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Like, I don't, even though like I will write the lyrics alone in the house or whatever, it's not done until it's bounced off of other people. And obviously, I think you get different things out of different creative dynamics, and like it's always going to be growing some part of your creative baby. Like it's all learning and figuring things out. And I think there's something very nice in that, because I don't know, we're all just scrabbling around in the dark, trying to connect something with someone. So Yeah.
I think that's why I found like I don't even know the exact quote from Damon Albarn, the one that everybody was like going.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, where I was like, why would anybody? One, it was just misogynistic, but two, why would anybody like talk down about collaboration and about co-writes and about crafting things together and like to make that your point about how someone's not an artist? I was like, but that's a huge part of being an artist.
So you're having a thoughtful discussion around it, but I feel like there's been a lot of time in Church's existence where people are like, so misogyny in music, you talk about that a lot, let's discuss that more then. I'm like, shall we? Let's.
You're like, can you please see 17 press clips?
Please see the previous 7 years of my career where no one asked anything about music ever.
Exactly. Ask me, so what's it like to be the girl in the band with the boys in the band? Because you're the
so at least when we made the horror inspired record, people are like tentatively a little more afraid of you, and they can ask questions that are different because it's a different prospect up front. You're like, we talk about this, and if you want to talk about the other stuff, then we can bring it back to the record because it's all tied together, which wasn't on purpose, but it's a happy accident.
That works out really well, because that's the thing, is like what sparked in my mind that quote was simply literally the collaborative aspect, and coming from someone who was in a band, I was shocked that he said that. I was just like,
yes,
that was the moment where I was like, do you just I just
like,
made puppet sounds at myself.
Understand? Yes, yeah.
Like, why would someone fall on their own sword that hard? But it's like,
yeah. Well, and it just, I don't know. The whole thing made me sad because I was like, well, I do respect Damon Albarn as a creator, and I love Taylor Swift, and I was like, guys, life's hard enough. Can we not? Can we just not? I don't need this today. I don't want this. I don't need this. And I think was his tweet was saying that it was taken out of context or whatever. I was like, fine. Hopefully we can just leave this here.
Yes.
But I think has she not done enough? Has she not time and time again proven it's enough? She shouldn't have we don't want to even pull this thread.
Exactly. That's the thing, is I'm like, women in music have gone above and beyond. And then I think about like all the wonderful people who've collaborated. Like, it was my friend Catherine, her band's the Anchoress. She had a great quote on this. Yeah. I love her. We keep being like, let's collaborate. And then it's like, oh God, we are definitely in an 8-hour time difference. And so every time we're like, this is the time when we can finally fly to be in the same place. It's like, this is the time when we can see no humans nor get on planes safely. She said this thing that really struck me, that she's just like, think about Bowie. She's just like, why, if you think about people who collaborate and go through all these different things, like so much of what Bowie did was based on collaboration and based on even like how you were talking about researching ideas, just immersing himself in different ideas and different people and different characters. And it's like, we'd never speak of a male artist that way, of being like, well, he's not an artist because he did all these different collaborations.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, there's just different assumptions about people, about men and women in those situations. And and also, you're like researching people. And if you do the same, if in any part of life, if you do the same thing over and over and over again, you're probably going to get similar results over and over again. So creatively, if you write in the same way all the time, then you're only probably going to, you're only maximizing a certain, and that doesn't mean that it's not great to be consistent or whatever, but I feel like that's, to me, why it's been good whenever Churches has done any exercise that isn't just the three of us in a room. I think that's incredibly valid and valuable, because you're learning about yourself, and I don't know, I feel like the studio should, as much as it can be a fun and vulnerable space. Like, it's quite a fragile dynamic that you need to fragile balance you have to strike. But I also think that once you get into so it should be comfortable in that way, but then sometimes I do feel like going outside of your comfort zone will teach you different things and open your mind up to a different space, kind of like what we were talking about with screenwriting, screen violence. If you'd asked me, do I want to write an album in this way, I would have said absolutely the fuck not. That sounds terrible. Why would I want to do that? Like, so I have to be like crying alone in my house and then unable to record things and have to ask my partner to help me, which is my deepest fear. because then it's like another thing you've been presented with your own inadequacy of not being able to do, you know what I mean? And then I'm very much separate church and state when it comes to collaborating with partners, because I've had very bad experiences in that space. But then everybody had to ask people for help in 2020. And I feel like when you get pushed a little bit into a new space, then you can get so much out of that. And I don't know, we did so much like late night recording after the construction next door had stopped, and like there was a different kind of collaboration with Ian and Martin because we were on Zoom at weird times of the day, and you know, like anything that can put your brain into a different space is going to get you something different. It might not always be good, but sometimes it'll be really great. So I'm grateful to be pushed gently out of my comfort zone every so often, I think.
Yeah, and it's giving yourself that opportunity to, like you said, like kind of preparing yourself to receive, like the Nick Cave vibes of like, okay, I'm setting this up, I'm trying this in different ways. And that also is extremely vulnerable to ask your partner for help on stuff. I too struggle with that.
Yeah, plus I think especially as a woman women in the industry that we're in, and especially with certain experiences I'm sure we've both had, I'm just like, it takes I don't know, I feel like I'm very possessive over my work in a way. Because I feel like it's been not a lot of the time, but there's definitely been times where I feel like people have tried to take that away from me or invalidate it, and I don't know, I was just deeply distrustful of the concept. And poor guy, he didn't do anything, he just offered to help me, and I was like, no. And then 2 days later I had to be like, okay, can you please help me? I need your help.
Okay, so maybe yes.
You know, and just being open to ideas and being open to asking for help and trusting that people are trying to help facilitate good things rather than facilitate negative things. I think I was like,
like their own thing, like you were saying about, you know, when you come to your bandmates with stuff that you're like, oh, that might not like this, where it's like that's really hard to reach middle ground of I'm sticking to my ideas and I'm confident in what I'm saying, and I'm also open to like feedback from others. Yes. But it has to be like people you really trust, because otherwise it's not even that they're doing something that's like malicious, but it's if you're getting too much outside feedback, it's hard to hold on to like what's your through line there.
Yeah, and I feel like it's about creatively respecting each other and taking on board, being able to take on board critique and figure out where the balance is and what hill you want to die on and why. Like there's certain lyrics that I've like gone to bat for, and I'm glad that I did. But then there's other things where I'm like, do I really care that much about that rhyming scheme? Not really. And if you have to say, oh no, but this is what it means, then you've not executed it well enough. And I think that that's a learning curve, because I'm sure that 8 years ago I was a lot more huffy about those things. I'm like, well, no, you're not understanding what it means. And now I would say, well, if they're not understanding what it means, then it's not finished yet. You haven't honed it if the message isn't coming through. But there's other things where I'm like, yes, no, this is clear, and I think this and that's. And then the same with music and production. Like everyone should, like, they're very open to discussing certain things, but ultimately it's about trust, and like trusting that when somebody vouches for something that they really care about, you just have to trust that things are coming from the right space.
Yeah.
Because I don't think collaboration can't be selfish, otherwise it's not going to work. It has to be very like, yeah, you can be focused on certain things that you want that you would justify why they should be there and whatever, but it has to be to serve the song and not to serve yourself, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. We sound really woo-woo today.
It's okay. I was born in LA.
Like, okay. She's got some crystals charging under the desk right now.
I was just like, there was a jacaranda tree outside my childhood home. It's like very vast.
You probably can't charge them under the desk. I don't know anything about crystals, clearly. I'm like, do you have to leave them in sunlight, moonlight? Don't know.
There's controversy in the crystal community. It's so funny. Like I like crystals because they're pretty and shiny and colorful. Like I'm a simple creature. I'm basically a magpie. And so I'm just like, lovely shinies. But like people are like, you must leave them under the moon. Only leave them under certain moons. Only leave them under moons during certain phases of them. I'm like, y'all can keep track of me. I don't know how to order groceries correctly. I'm I just.
What if I leave them next to the 40 tomatoes I accidentally got? Will this do anything? Like I technically there is one crystal in this building because somebody very kindly gave it to me as a housewarming present, and then I was like, I don't know what to do with this. So I was like, oh, thank you so much. This is so nice of you. And then it's just it's in a drawer. I don't know what to do. I feel so bad. It's in the kitchen drawer next to all the miscellaneous stuff. It's next to like the sellotape and kitchen scissors and the mystery cards from a guy that said he cleans windows or whatever. Like
there's always that drawer.
Is this bringing me bad? Is this why bad things are happening? It's because I've disrespected this crystal, but I didn't want to give it away because that felt more disrespectful, so now it just stays in there. And I don't imagine that drawer light is one of the lights that charges it. Probably, I don't know. I'm Scottish. I'm not built for this stuff.
That's hilarious. Just like that crystal is holding it down in the mystery drawer.
every time I open it, I'm like, oh, a reminder and symbol of your people pleasing. I'm like, this person has no idea whether I have it or not anymore, but I'm so in advance ashamed of the idea of giving it away that I just have to keep it there, and it clunks around in this drawer every time we open it.
I like that it makes its presence known, at least. Like, it's just like, you can't forget about me.
Every time I put the car keys in, I'm like, oh, there it is again. There it is.
Is it a pretty crystal, at least, or is it like an unsightly crystal that...
It's like white, clear white. I don't know. Clearly, I didn't even get to the point of looking up. I was like, maybe I'll use it as like a paperweight. A really not fit for purpose cat toy. Like I don't know. It's too heavy for them to move. It's sharp. I don't think they should have it. I don't know. It
sounds like it's selenite. Is it kind of, does it have like
you said you don't care about crystals, but you do.
But I went deep on a rabbit hole of learning the names of them because they're shiny. It's funny because someone was just like, but you have a lot of crystals. Like, do you think that they do things? And I was just like, well, no, I think we do things. And when we feel good about stuff or we're reminded of things, we probably are going to do the things more. So you can imbue whatever you want with that meaning. It doesn't have to be like actually that crystal. Like I could imbue, I'm looking at my external hard drive. If I had decided that external hard drive was associated with, abundance, like I could be like, yes, I will meditate with my external hard drive. Like it doesn't matter what the thing is.
I mean, that's better than... Like once I was looking at it, I was like, it's shaped a bit like a pointy stake. So if anything, it would be useful for self-defense. It's like, this is about as far as I've gotten. I'm like, if there was a home invasion and for some reason the only thing you could reach was this drawer, this would be useful. And I'm like, all right, it served its purpose. There we go.
There you go. Yeah,
the crystal community will be horrified by this conversation.
Oh my god, the crystal community is going to be like, this is a closed practice.
Like she has disrespected it. She's talking about using it in self-defense. But
I mean, I joke that because what you're describing sounds like selenite. By the way, I don't know if you went through a phase as a child of the collecting weird rocks phase. This is what led to the learning the names of the crystals phase.
Oh, I see.
Yes, my brain is just like, I like this thing. Shall I learn everything about it for no reason in approximately 48 hours?
Yes, you should. And I think that's a great thing to hold on to. Like, in adult life, learning is nice. Not for me in this topic, apparently. But I did learn about a lot of other stuff over the course of 2020, so...
Well, I'm curious what you learned when you had said that, like, there was a reason why people were drawn to horror, particularly people watching women be terrified. Though, obviously, like, the thing that sparked in my mind was like, well, yeah, we have experience of being surveilled, like, on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And so that tapped into it. But I was curious, what did the research say about, like, why women enjoy it? Like, what did they hypothesize? I was just like, see previous about nerd learning things. I was like, what did you find in your research?
I think the thing that I was drawn to most was the idea that it's in some way reassuring because we're told so much in life that our fears are not valid, or that so I think all women know that the fears are valid because we know what happens. But when you watch a film and you are terrified, and then you are proven to be correct for being terrified, there's something comforting in that, I think. Yeah, and I think the sense of relatability, not because when you watch Scream or It Follows, these things have happened to you in that exact way, but you can relate to certain elements of that. And I think, I don't know, so much of what we seek in any kind of art is being like feeling seen or feeling understood or having your thoughts validated in some way. So yeah, I think when I watch certain horror films, I'm like, oof. And I think, yeah, that maybe there is a voyeurism in it because especially for women, I'm like, you're only ever a certain amount of bad luck or circumstance away from something like that happening. There's really nothing that separates any of us from any of the other women that terrible things happen to. So, and I think that's the pressure is put on women to make the right decisions to keep themselves safe. And I don't think it's not about any of that, because you can make all the quote unquote right decisions and still have terrible things happen because you're not in control of the actions of men ultimately. And every time something happens in the news and people advise women to travel in groups and don't go home after a certain point, I'm like, fine. I understand why people are saying that, because they don't want any more women to get hurt in that instance, but it's just a completely wrong way, like the upside down way to have that conversation, because we always talk about more ways that women can make themselves safer and more decisions that women should think extra hard about before living life. We're not having a PSA saying, dear men, please stop
attacking women.
You know? So, write a song about it. Make a record about it. Sit inside your house and be very upset about it.
Well, and what a time to do it when, in a way, I realized I said the word surveilled, and it was during a time when, like, we ultimately weren't really being perceived. Like, you were in isolation. And so that's a fascinating dichotomy to be able to actually then, like, sit and parse through the feelings of that, because, like, it's almost like the pressure was off in a way. You weren't going out and about. You weren't encountering that during that moment.
I think if there hadn't been that enforced isolation and separation from, because I do feel like a lot of being a woman generally, but a lot of the band work specifically, not that I'm not honest in interviews, but there's a lot of, you just have to have a certain threshold and you have to talk about certain things and keep addressing certain things and then just give politely political answers to certain questions and be like, well, and you have to figure out how you're constantly negotiating within a space. And then I think that if you're writing and you're in that headspace, it's harder to get to the actual real thoughts sometimes. And I don't know, I think that the best lyrics of the bands and artists that I love are the ones that are the raw ones that are from just below the surface, whether those are really emotional or really angry or any, like, well, anger is an emotion, any kind of emotion, like, you have to just take off the here's what's okay in society filter, like, a little bit to get to that space. And I do think that, I don't know, I think it's a lot of being in the band has been about, I don't know, especially since the narrative around it at the beginning was, she's a very angry feminist and she said this and this. And I look back on that, I'm like, not really. I look at clips, if I ever see clips from around that time, I'm like, I'm just a bit of a sad 24, 25-year-old who's saying common sense things to journalists who aren't really taking it that seriously. So, and I do think that, there was a lot of kind of trying to be acceptable enough. Like, and it's not lost on me that things that I was saying and people were giving me backslaps for were acceptable because they were coming out of the mouth of a petite, straight white woman. Like, right. And it's funny to look back on all the negotiating for space that you've done, and it all comes down to acceptability. You're like, well, I'm still making myself just acceptable enough so that you won't be upset by any of the things that I'm saying. And that ties into so many other things that we don't have time to talk about, probably. But I think during the writing of this record, I wasn't really worrying about any of that. And now she's free, and I'm patting a cat just out of shot. So it's all really come full circle.
Yeah, it's like
full cat lady witch, doesn't understand crystals, but hopefully I have leveled up to a different space in some ways.
Well, it's that idea that you had brought up even towards the beginning of when we were chatting, that you said that it's like, the division of where the fucks are given. And it's like, especially like I'm similar in age. I'm a slightly more elder millennial. And I'm barely 5 feet tall and pale as death. And so in a lot of ways have been in a similar situation of like, okay, how do I navigate this, and realizing how I've personally navigated space and realizing where my fucks should be given and where sometimes I can be like, can I allocate my fucks to someone else? Like, can I give space so someone else can take up this, because someone deserves this space, like, actually more than I do, and they have way more to say, and they have a very different perspective that's very important. Here, have it. Like, where it's like I've become less precious about it in that way, and less prone to, like, it was interesting even when we were talking about like the Damon Albarn moment, which popped in my head because of collaboration instead of the misogyny, that like then you did the mental calculus of, oh my god, I've talked about this so much in interview. Then I did the mental calculus of, oh god, now I'm one of those people that accidentally brought that up in an interview with her. And like watching us both mental calculus at each other, I was just like, oh no. And I was like, but less of that when you're writing, because if you get caught up in the mental calculus when you're writing, it's like
that's death. Creative death. That's just, and then creative death means that nobody's going to want to connect with anything that you're saying. So then no amount of self-media training to answer those questions will make a difference, because you won't be talking to anyone at all. There you go. I catastrophized the whole thing.
There we go. You're just like, and then you're just a crystal rattling in a drawer.
And you're going to have to figure out if the crystal's worth anything, because you don't sell records anymore. We'll have to see. Hopefully it won't get to there, but who knows?
No. And hearing what you had to say about horror movies, and then what you had to say about like positioning oneself in the media, I had a conversation with, do you know the artist Yola?
Yes.
She is just, I love her. And the things that she was talking about, I was so excited to talk to her on the podcast, because it's not my base of experience. Like, she was talking about her personal narrative and bringing that to light, and bringing like Black women's voices to light. And I certainly am not that. And so that's why I'm just like, oh, how exciting. People mysteriously listen to this podcast. Here you go. Boom. Like,
yes. Well, yeah. And I do think that is something that everybody hopefully is getting, but should be aware of already, but hopefully is becoming more aware of. And yeah, I think a lot of the time you get wrapped up in your own experiences, and you just have to have a fucking awareness and empathy. And when I think about all the times where I was grappling for space within projects, like, yeah, but it was like, you then need to pay that forward to somebody else. Like, and I think that the people that don't have empathy for that is maybe, well, ignorance, but also if you've never had to grapple for space, then you don't know what that's like to have to. And not that I'm saying that I'm in any way in a similar position to that. I just mean I've never, other than like 2 weeks when I was 16, I've never been in a band with another female. I've always been in bands with men. And it's been a lot of bands. There's been a lot of years, and there's been a lot of different people in that. And each of those experiences were different, but a lot of those experiences has been about just like, again, it's like negotiating for space and negotiating to be allowed to do things. And I think a lot of people, a lot of men have never had to do that. So they don't know what that's like. So they don't know that they should maybe create a little space for somebody else. So yes, especially there's a lot of shit white women in the world. So I think it's important to keep giving yourself a kicking to make sure that you're putting into action what you're saying that you're doing, I guess.
Yeah, it's the making a space for others, where it's like, I think of it not as a hierarchy, but like as people who have had to not make space versus people who have kind of had to make space, people who have had to make a lot of space, where it's like everybody's had their own experience with it, but being aware of like, oh, in these situations, space has been made for me, and in other situations, I've had to make space. So how can I be more mindful of how to make space for others?
Yes. And I remember having a conversation with an ex-boyfriend shortly after the Me Too movement started to get discussed more in the news. And I remember having to sit down and be like, But don't you understand, though, that someone's going to need to be giving up some space in order for this to occur? That's not people being discriminated against. It just means that I was confusing to me. I'm like, oh yeah, but if you've never had to not have anything, then then that does feel like something's getting taken away from you. And I'm like, yes, but if people have had all these opportunities and all these options and all this access, then what would that be like if that access was shared with other people? I wonder. And then maybe the storytelling that we're doing would be different, and maybe the music we're listening to would be different, and maybe, but it was odd to have that conversation and realize that if you've never in any way, I guess that's just privilege, I suppose, if you've never experienced any kind of injustice or being shut out of something, then you don't have any understanding of why that's important to address.
Like why someone would feel that way. Yeah, and it's like I feel like people think privilege is like a bad word or an insult, but like for me at least it's like it's kind of a like check engine light where it's like, oh, this is something you may have missed because it's outside your experience.
Yes, and there's definitely things that I look back on having said or done. I'm like, oh Jesus, but and nobody's perfect, but you should be trying to learn and trying to listen. And I know, I just said the words, we're listening, we're learning, we're learning, all that bullshit.
We're love and lighting. I just told you what kind of crystal might be improving the life of the window man in your drawer.
Yes, but then it's not about like sitting drowning in your own guilt and how you feel about it. It's like, well, no, then you're making it about you again.
Exactly.
Like, fucking shut up for once. And I say that to myself too. I'm not just being a bitch to other people.
Oh no, I feel similarly. And the whole perspective shift, like it's been such a gift during this time to do this podcast, because I never expected that. If someone had told me a few years ago, like, by the way, you're going to be stuck in your living room, but you're going to talk to like over 100 strangers all about creative endeavors and social issues, I'd be like,
what?
Huh?
Why?
Like I'm gonna holler at what they're like. You're gonna meet a lot of other people's cats over this thing called Zoom.
Always a treat. But how are we this far into Zoom meetings? And some people don't know the Zoom protocol yet. I'm like, if there is a cat in the room, don't just tell me the cat is there. I want the cat to be presented. I want to know the cat's name.
Yes.
And then, as you would introduce anybody at the beginning of a meeting,
you show the baby.
I would like, yes. And then you're like, now back to work, everybody. But then I've definitely done that in meetings where people don't want me to be doing that. They're like, we're just trying to have the meeting. Can you get your goddamn cat off the table? I'm like, no.
Who are these people? Are they okay?
She goes where she goes.
Who doesn't want to see cats on Zoom?
I hate to tell you, some people are not cat people. I know. But isn't that just the beautiful tapestry of life? Like every time I look at it, I'm like, fascinating. There's two little kind of tiger lionesses living in my house, and they choose to be in here. They choose to hang out, and every time one of them gives me the little eye kiss, I'm like, what a joy. What a joy, a privilege, an honor. I don't know.
Oh, I'm glad that they were essentially your co-pilots in the research of this record.
In your unraveling brain, they're the co-pilots. They are the witnesses to this, whatever this is. They're seeing a lot of it.
I was like, like it kind of settled in my mind, like the experience of researching horror, writing about that, tapping into the personal feelings of it. I was just like, thank God you had the cats there.
Well, they'll sleep through any of that. But if it's like the theme tune to the White Lotus, then they wake up and they're all intrigued. But they can sleep through an entire rewatch of all of the Scream films. Totally fine. But then any kind of Enya or panpipe based music, they always wake up for that as well. Another fascinating study. I don't think we'll make a record about it, but you never know. You never know.
I was just like, now I'm like, I want to study cats versus Enya, because my sometimes cat usually comes when I'm playing the piano. Like she knows the sound of my piano.
Play her a bit of play her a bit and see. What was the other? Once we were watching Titanic once, which I don't know why I decided to do this during the lockdown, but yes, the recurring score in that was very confusing to one of the cats. She climbed all the way up on top to stare at the speaker, because at any time there was the kind of whistly. I'm like, I don't know. It's interesting. Maybe it's the tones.
Yeah.
Don't know. I was like, every time fascinating. I don't know that my partner finds it as fascinating as me, but I feel like a lot of our day is spent with me being like, look at that, look at them. Are you seeing? Are you looking? And he's not. But that's fine. I don't think he gets a lot more done than I do. And it's not that he doesn't enjoy them, but I think he's fine enjoying them to the level that he's enjoying them. I just enjoy them like to max headroom all the time.
Like 11 out of 10 enjoyment of the cats.
Yeah. And they are probably here for about 4 out of 10. They're like, that's fine. I do too much. I do too much to them, I think.
Well, I mean, that is why we have a lot of you in the monitor.
Yes. I was like, more cat in the monitor all the time. Yes.
Oh, it has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you, and I appreciate you giving so much of your time.
Yeah, thank you very much for asking. It was really nice to have a different kind of conversation than what we normally have, and I'm glad that you got to witness at least one cat coming in and out of the room. People who don't like cats are going to be like, fuck this podcast.
They're going to be like,
this episode only. But
why is Pam talking about cats so much?
Thank you again for listening to this episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and on Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who is literally a rock star. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next episode. Thank you.